Happy Easter. I hope you've enjoyed celebrating Jesus' resurrection on Sunday. What a wonderful journey we've been on these last few weeks during Lent with the prayer course. Many of us went through that to deepen our understanding of prayer and how we should be praying. And then we had our wonderful reflective service on Maundy Thursday, and then the hour at the cross on Friday. And then Easter Day. I always feel that's such a release from the preparations during Lent, a release into a new season, it feels like. And I hope you also got that same sense of encouragement and a new start. My name's Andrew, and I'm bringing you our midweek reflection as we start a new season, looking at Paul's first letter to the church in Thessalonica in Macedonia. Now, Thessalonica at that time was a major city, some 200,000 inhabitants, and it's now still exists. It's Thessaloniki. It's in northeast Greece. It was a very important trading city. It was a port, it still is, and on a trading route from Italy, from Rome, through that area and to the Middle East and even beyond. So the Roman Empire were ruling at the time, and but because of its prominence, it seems that Thessalonica was given a degree of autonomy. So it had expanded in its own way. Paul had visited there in around AD 50, so less than 20 years after Jesus' resurrection, and he planted a church there. And he'd had some very encouraging feedback from Timothy and Silas, who are mentioned in this letter, as we'll see. Positive feedback about how they're doing. And so Paul wrote this letter, probably one of the first letters to churches that he wrote, to encourage them and to give them some further instruction and teaching. So today we're going to look at the first chapter of 1 Thessalonians, and it's verses 1 to 10. If you're not familiar with it, I suggest you pause the video now and read through those verses. So, what stands out for you in this letter? Well, for me, it's immediately a very typical Paul letter. It opens with greetings, thanksgiving for the people, mentioning of prayers that he prays for these people in this church, and yes, there are words of encouragement. And I saw three very familiar elements that Paul focuses on. Three elements of Christian character: faith, love, and hope. And of course, they may remind us of other of Paul's letters where these characteristics are borne out. And these, in this letter, emphasize the what, how, and why of how the church was developing and the Christians within it. The what was the work, which Paul links to their faith. The how was their labour, and particularly related to love. Perhaps we can presume that they were ministering to people in need in various ways and showing their love. And then the why. Paul mentions endurance because of their hope in Jesus Christ. This is the second coming for which they were hoping. All of this leads Paul to some very encouraging words about the church. It says there in verse 7 and 8, seeing them as a model to all believers everywhere, it says. Wow. We just get that sense that Paul is really so happy with how they've developed. But we also can read that it's not been an easy journey for them. We get that sense in verse 6. Paul talks about severe suffering, not just suffering, but severe suffering. Thessalonica then multicultural, multi-ethnic, and a lot of pagan religions being practiced, and a new religion would not have been welcome. We can imagine there would have been much resistance, probably aggression and even persecution and worse. And Paul recognises that a lot of the Christians were involved in these pagan practices. He says, I've heard that you've turned to God from idols, as we read in verse 9, to serve the living and true God. They'd made a firm commitment to a new way of life, the way of Jesus. And why? Well, in verse 10, we see the crux of this opening chapter, to wait for the coming of Jesus, the second coming. Now, if Paul was to visit our parish and our churches, or maybe had received feedback from friends, what would he see? What would he be able to celebrate in how we live our lives as Christians here in Cove? Well, I suggest there is much. Look at our weekly news email. We are growing deeper through things like the prayer course, the upcoming confirmation, our prayer groups and home groups. We are growing wider through our weekly ministries, through Food Bank, through raising donations for charities like Christian Aid Week, which is coming up shortly. And we are growing a multi-generation family in our church through our children's work, our youth work, which is starting up, through our connection with families and with more senior people in our church and community. And so we show ourselves to be open to the disciplines of learning, loving and giving. So be encouraged and be keen to serve the living and true God. Amen.